I know the Jaguar purists are going to hate me for this, but this might just be my favorite modern production Jaguar ever produced. Hey folks, Eddie from Totally Wired Guitars here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Johnny Marr signature Fender Jaguar. So I'm excited to be talking about one of my favorite guitars of all time today, and in particular, this customized one, which was refinished to try to emulate Johnny's Comet Sparkle Fender Jaguar, of which I believe only one or maybe two exist. I could have sworn I saw someone on Instagram that somehow was able to convince Fender to make him one. Anyway, the Johnny Marr Jaguar first hit the scene back in 2012 and has been one of the longest running, if not the longest running production Fender Jaguar that has been produced since they started to be reissued again by Fender USA back in 1999. Now, there are a number of special things about the Johnny Marr Jaguar that some folks may not know, but his signature model is based on his own vintage 1965 Jaguar. And because of this, Fender decided to give this signature model a couple of special appointments that you are not going to find on any other modern production Jag. Now, the most obvious of this being the controls on this particular Jag, rather than having your traditional rhythm circuit and the 3 switches to independently and in combination select your pickups along with the strangle switch. On Johnny's model, we've got a more streamlined layout for the modern player. One of the gripes that a lot of Jaguar players have, particularly ones who play live, is that once they are really digging in, they accidentally end up knocking into one or more of those 3 switches, turning their pickups off in the middle of a set, which is definitely no bueno. That also extends for some players to even hitting the rhythm circuit switch, which will make their tone darker in the middle of the performance. So in place of that, we've got this 4-way blade switch, pretty much like a Telecaster or a Stratocaster switch that is oriented horizontally on here so as to not be able to accidentally knock it into a different pickup position. And on the top, we've got dual bass cut or strangle switches, one that is universal for all positions, and that is this one right here. And then you've got a second one that only works in series. And I was trying to think of why Johnny would do that rather than having it be selectable for all of the positions. And all I can think of is I have seen some interviews where Johnny talks about the series position being his favorite tone on the Jag. So for example, maybe Johnny likes using both pickups in parallel with no bass cut, and then he can easily switch over to the series position that already has the bass cut engaged for that biting and striking lead tone that's just got a lot more mids to it, because it effectively turns both pickups into a giant humbucker. And it really helps to cut through the mix to get rid of some of that extra low end that's not needed for those leads. Now, going over a couple of other specs on the Johnny Marr model, we've got an alder body that actually is cut a bit differently than your standard AVRI or even AV65 or 60th anniversary, in that they really tried to pay attention to the look of the round over on this model. It looks a bit rounder, the way that you will find on a lot of actual vintage Jaguars. as compared to more modern ones that have a little bit harder of an edge. We've also got a deeper tummy cut, as you can see here, which is really, really nice and just feels really sleek and extra comfortable when playing. This also features a maple neck with a slab rosewood fretboard that is a 7¼ radius with vintage size frets. Now, the neck shape on this is another special feature of the Johnny Marr signature Jag. It's definitely not thin, but it's also not overly thick. They call it more of an oval shape. And I can definitely concur, owning an actual 1965 Jaguar myself, that this neck profile really hits that vintage feel in hand spot on. Another special feature on this neck is the fact that it does not feature a bone nut. Oftentimes, obviously, bone nuts are made from cow bone or ox bone. And Johnny has been a long time vegetarian, and so the nut on this is made of micarta, which is kind of like a really hard, dense plastic. I feel no need whatsoever to switch this out to a bone nut because the guitar plays fine as it is, and the density of this material doesn't really compromise on the tone as far as I'm concerned. On the back of the guitar, you've got your standard V serial neck plate, as well as a set of Gotoh SD91 vintage style tuners. They are the same tuners that Fender had long used on the AVRI 62 Jaguar, and they are essentially the same thing that you've seen on the AV65 and the 60th anniversary and even custom shop models that have the Fender branded single line pure vintage tuners, which are essentially just repackaged Gotoh SD91 tuners. Now, a couple of other special appointments that this guitar has is that firstly, for the tremolo arm, as well as the bridge on his prototype, Johnny actually worked with John over at Staytrem. No, the Staytrem bridge and the Staytrem collet were both mods that he had done to his own personal guitar. So he wanted to bring that to his signature model. And I'm assuming that Staytrem struck a deal with Fender because the stock bridge looks 95% the same as a Staytrem bridge, complete with the little nylon bushings at the end of the bridge post to keep the thicker bridge height adjustment screws from recessing and lowering the bridge over time. And he also has a Staytrem-like collet here. This one has a nylon sleeve inside of the collet, and that's intended to keep your arm where you leave it. No floppy or loose trem arm issues on the Johnny Marr model because of that solution. And then under the hood, you've got a set of special wound bare knuckle low output Jaguar pickups that are not reverse wound, reverse polarity. And Johnny says that they went this direction with his signature pickups because he was trying to emulate the old Telecaster pickups from the 50s, where he felt that having pickups that were the same polarity resulted in a more focused sound, not as much of a pull from the magnets on the strings. And so I can't really hear the nuance of those differences. All I can hear is that there is indeed some 60 cycle hum when choosing both pickups in either parallel or the series position. And they are great pickups. Now, they are a little bit too low output for me. I mean, I love a good, clean single coil pickup, and this is no slag at all to bare knuckle pickups, who just in my own personal experience make phenomenal guitar pickups, especially for offsets. But yeah, I do like Jaguar pickups that are wound closer to 7K, maybe even over 7K. I like to have a little bit of character and color to my pickups. I like them to be able to drive a tube amp a little bit more readily. And these ones just sound, I'm not going to lie, a little clinical to me, right? They've got all of the top end sparkle and all of that, but they just don't have the mids, which are already kind of sparse even on really good examples of Jaguar pickups, but even more so, I would say, with this particular set. And I've heard folks tell me that they just feel like these kind of fart out when you're trying to use them in heavier gain settings, and they just don't really drive those kinds of pedals or amps as well as pickups that might be wound just a little bit hotter. Now, there are so many reasons why this is my favorite among the Jags. Now, the first being that when these came out, these had probably among the thinnest finishes that Fender ever came out with on a modern production Jaguar. They used that flash coat nitro process, which they also use, I believe, on the American Vintage 65 models. Those did not have the same thick poly undercoat that the American Vintage 62 had. And so with that, you just had a really thin, resonant, and lively acoustic tone to a lot of the bodies on these Johnny Marr Jaguars that I've played over the years. Now, they did change that a bit later on, I believe in the later 2010s, because folks were complaining that these finishes were just flaking off like over time, even though they were taking good care of their guitars. And so eventually, a bit later on, they did change back to having a thinner poly undercoat on these. Now, shockingly, outside of the custom shop, this is the only premium nitrocellulose lacquer finish Jaguar that Fender USA currently offers ever since they discontinued the American original 60s Jag back in 2022. And Fender, unfortunately, also have yet to announce a counterpart for their AV266 series, one that I know so many other Jaguar lovers have been looking forward to for a number of years now. And sadly, that announcement did not come at Winter NAMM this year like we had hoped. I'm just glad that they haven't discontinued this, because it is just such a wonderful example of a Jaguar, despite the fact that they have made these modern appointments. And while I do love and miss the rhythm circuit of a traditional Jaguar, I've got to say that this series position, I've got to agree with Johnny in that it is my favorite tone to come out of a Jaguar, to the point where I usually end up making a series mod on even traditionally spec Jaguars that I've owned, because it's just a heavenly tone for either lead or even rhythm, especially when paired with the bass cut or strangle switch. Another big selling point of this model for me is definitely the neck. This is probably my favorite modern production Jaguar neck ever made. It's just this oval C shape that it's got, almost somewhere between maybe a C and D kind of shape. Definitely a bit flatter, and definitely not thin by any stretch. Not as thin as the American Vintage 62 necks. This definitely does feel a bit fuller in the hand than those. But at the same time, it's also not the chonker that was the American Vintage 65 or the American Original 60s Jaguar necks. Definitely somewhere in between. And I just feel like the fretboard edges on these feel a little bit more rolled off than those models. And yeah, from playing chords to doing more lead work, it is just comfortable up and down the fretboard. And on top of that, the premium hardware that comes with these, I do like the fact that it comes with that Staytrem license bridge. It's not something that you necessarily need to go out and try to upgrade. And while I do have an actual Staytrem bridge on this, just because I had one and it needed a home, and so I thought, why not put it on here? The stock bridge really hits, I'd say probably at least 90% of the way there as far as the Staytrem vibe is concerned, with the only differences really being the visual look of it. The Staytrem actually has a bit more of a brushed kind of finish to it rather than the polished chrome look of the stock Staytrem license bridge. And while I don't necessarily see the Staytrem collet as a necessity, because I always do the bend trick, which makes loose trem arms a non-issue on any offset I own or end up working on. It's a nice feature to have there where you don't need to take that additional step to address a really common problem. Another thing that I love about this particular signature model is that over the years, in addition to the standard Olympic white as well as KO metallic finishes, they've also come out with these limited run finishes that have been black, Lake Placid blue, Fever Dream yellow, Sherwood green. I'm not sure if he's got another one that's going to be coming out next, but I really love seeing the different variants that come out. And unfortunately, those a lot of times end up fetching a pretty penny because they really did run them in quite limited numbers, making them collectibles for a lot of fans of this guitar. And I know it's unique to Johnny, but it would be awesome if someday they did release his official Comet Sparkle model, because there is something special about that finish that I haven't been able to quite pin down. I almost feel like, based on interviews that I'd seen that he's had, he talks about how the original idea for it started off as some kind of yellow. The base coat for his almost looks like a a yellowed Olympic white that was then shot with like hollow flake and then a clear coat on top of it. There's just something like magical and almost like pearlescent about his finish that wasn't quite nailed here. I feel like a lot of people mistake that particular version of his guitar as just being gold or champagne colored. And with this one, which was done by MJT, this is more of like a silver flake that was then shot with a tinted nitro to give it that gold or champagne kind of look to it. Obviously, this is close to a perfect Jaguar for me, but one caveat that I do want to let people know, particularly on Johnny Marr Jaguars that have been produced over the past 5-6+ years or so, I feel like Fender probably have changed the formula for their nitro clear coats, because a lot of these necks for models that have been produced since about probably 2020 or so end up having these sticky feeling necks, which are definitely a nuisance because no one wants to feel their hand get all gummed up when sliding up and down a guitar neck. And that can easily be addressed with like a Brillo pad or some steel wool. And for me, I do actually like the glossy finish neck. And so on this one, which is from 2023, I ended up doing the steel wool treatment and then using some Meguiar's polishing compound to bring it back up to shine, which ended up solving the issue of the sticky neck for me. Another thing to note is that if you go with an earlier run of the Johnny Marr model, the Staytrem licensed bridges that came on those did not have the same modern 52 millimeter string spacing. And so with the 56 millimeter string spacing that those ones came with, and I believe those are ones that came out maybe before 2018, you unfortunately had your low and high E strings coming a bit too close to the edge of the fretboard, which posed problems for a lot of folks because when they would try to bend, they would end up slipping off of the fretboard. And so that is definitely something to look out for if you end up with, you know, a 2012 to, I'd say, 2016 or 18 model of the Johnny Marr. Another thing to note for my vintage accurate purists out there who are thinking about getting one of these and then just modding it back to vintage specs with a proper rhythm circuit, for example, you are unfortunately going to have to route out some material from the rhythm circuit cavity because for whatever reason, most likely because of aesthetics, and wanting the switches in the plate to look a bit more visually balanced, they ended up changing the shape and size of that route, and so a normal rhythm circuit would not fit without some modification. It's easy enough to do with something like a Dremel tool or even a file. Maybe some sandpaper and a sanding block, but be aware that that will definitely decrease the value of the guitar overall. Thankfully, that issue does not exist for the lead circuit. If you did want to switch back to the 3-switch configuration, there's definitely enough space in there for those 3 switches without any further opening up of that route. Anyway, do I recommend this guitar, especially in this era when, you know, vintage spec Jaguars are down pretty bad, with the only offerings from Fender right now being your Squire Affinity, the Player 2 Jaguar, your classic vibe 60s and 70s Squire Jaguars, as well as your Ventera 2 model. I'm definitely going to say that this one is leaps and bounds better in quality, feel, sound, tone, appointments than any of those models for sure. And if you can get one of these at a decent price, and I sometimes have seen these for as low as $1,550, $1,600 sometimes. Usually they come with your typical chips and dents and natural wear when they are at that price point. But at that price, or maybe even just a little bit more, these are definitely keepers, and there's a reason why this is one of the ones that survived my great offset sell-off of 2025. I ended up selling off all of my other Japanese Jaguar models and other American models that I'd had. And this one is the one that I ended up keeping, not just because it was already customized to be something very unique, but because I just really, at the end of the day, love how this guitar feels. And in summary, while I am super happy that this Jaguar model is still being produced, I do think that there is room, right, for a new American Vintage Series Jaguar to come out. So Fender, if you're listening, this is yet another petition for you to go ahead and release that AV2 66 Jaguar that so many of us have been waiting for. I think that there is enough of a difference, particularly in the wiring configuration of a traditional Jag, that this one serves its purpose for folks that like these kinds of more streamlined appointments, whereas I think there's always going to be some market for folks who want one that is more vintage correct. Anyway, I think that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, especially if you are in the market for a Johnny Marr Jaguar yourself. What do you all think? Do any of you own this model? How has it compared to other Jaguars that you have played and owned over the years? Is it your favorite? Is there something that you like better? Definitely let me know down in the comments. As always, if you haven't already, please hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell to be notified of new videos as soon as they drop. And don't forget to follow Totally Wired Guitars for more offset guitars buying tips.